Welcome to the deep dive. We're about to jump into something that's, well, really shaped modern industry, but it remains surprisingly tricky for most companies to truly get right. We're exploring the Toyota way.
That's right. And for this deep dive, we're mainly drawing from excerpts of Jeffrey Laker's book, The Toyota Way. I mean, this is based on over 20 years of his research. He spent a lot of time talking to people right inside Toyota executives, engineers, folks on the line.
Yeah, Toyota's name is just synonymous with quality, with efficiency. It's legendary, really.
Yeah.
We've all seen companies trying to copy their methods, right? But very few seem to nail it long term.
And that's the big question, isn't it? Why is it so hard? That's what we want to unpack here. We need to look beyond, the visible stuff, the assembly lines, the Kanban cards, and dig into the philosophy underneath, the culture, their approach to people, to learning. It's all connected.
Okay, so get ready. We'll trace Toyota back to its, well, surprising roots, uncover the main principles, see how they actually work using examples from the source, and really try to understand why this whole system is such a challenge for others to truly adopt.
Let's dive in.
All right, let's start at the beginning, way back, actually, before cars even. It started with family and looms.
It did, yeah. Sakichi Toyota, he was the founder, a real inventor. One of his big things was an automatic loom designed to stop itself if a thread broke. So no defects, that idea, building in quality, catching problems early, it was there right from the start.
Wow, a mistake-proof loom back in the late 1800s. It's pretty amazing foresight. And it was his son, Kichiro Toyota, who took things into cars.
Exactly. Sakichi actually sent Kichiro over to England in 1929 to sell the patent for that loom. He got about 100,000 pounds for it, which became the seed money for Toyota Motor Corporation in the 30s. So the car company literally grew out of this super advanced air-proofing loom.
That connection is just fascinating. So what did Kichiro pick up when he was studying manufacturing in England then?
Right. This is where you see the seeds of what became the Toyota Production System, TPS. Kichiro wasn't like a star student academically, but he watched everything meticulously. He was at Platt Brothers, a big loom maker, sketching how workers move, timing things, and he was just struck by the waste he saw.
Waste? Like what?
Well, he figured workers were only really productive, maybe about 3 out of 8 hours. He saw specific wastes, like unnecessary walking. People doing rework on parts, they'd have to walk across the whole plant just to get a tool, like a vise. And the rework itself, obviously, huge waste of time, materials. These observations were absolutely key for him, foundational ideas.
Just noticing that,
Yeah.
that fundamental waste, people spending more than half their time not actually adding value, just walking for tools.
Yeah.
That's huge. And then Taiichi Ohno comes in after the war and builds TPS.
Yeah, Ono is really seen as the main architect of modern TPS. He took Kichiro's insights and really ran with them. And maybe his biggest, most counterintuitive insight was pinpointing overproduction as the root of all evil, basically, the fundamental waste.
Overproduction, making too much too soon. Why is that worse than, say, waiting around or making bad parts?
Because overproduction creates inventory, just piles of stuff sitting there between steps. And those piles, those buffers, they hide all the other problems. If you've got a huge stack of parts, you don't feel the pain immediately if a machine upstream breaks down, right? Or if there are quality issues creeping in. The pressure to fix those underlying problems just isn't there. You just grab from the buffer. So yeah, ironically, big buffers actually reduce the motivation to improve.
Okay. So the inventory isn't just a cost on the books. It's actively hiding the stuff you should be fixing. It lets the real problems just linger.
Exactly. It kills the urgency. And thinking even bigger, the source makes it clear that Toyota's purpose isn't just profit. I mean, yes, they're incredibly profitable, and they have this unique thing of holding massive cash reserves.
Right. The source mentioned like $57.5 billion in cash back in 2019. That flies in the face of typical shareholder pressure, right? Distribute that cash.
Totally. But their stated purpose, it goes beyond just making money. It's about contributing to society, to customers, communities, and supporting their own people, their partners.
So that huge cash pile isn't just being old school conservative. It's tied to their values. It lets them ride out storms like pandemics without ditching people.
Precisely. It gives them security. They can avoid drastic things like mass layoffs that just devastate communities and supplier networks, things other companies might feel forced into.
Okay, so we've got this foundation, identifying waste, questioning how things are done, a purpose beyond just profit. How did this all get structured into what people call the Toyota way?
Okay, that takes us to the Toyota Way 2001 framework. It's often shown as a house.
A house. Like with walls and a roof. What are the key parts?
Yeah, you can picture it like that. 2 main pillars holding up the roof, respect for people and continuous improvement.
Okay, those sound, well, you hear those phrases a lot in business. What makes them different at Toyota?
Well, for starters, they sit on a really solid foundation. 5 core principles: challenge, kaizen, genshi genbutsu go, and see respect and teamwork. But maybe the most unique thing is how they see the relationship. Respect for people isn't just another pillar, it's often seen as the foundation that continuous improvement is built on.
Respect is the foundation for improvement. How does that work?
Well, the thinking is the kind of deep, constant improvement that defines Toyota solving thousands of little problems, always refining, that only really happens with highly capable, motivated people. People who feel respected, who are developed, who actually care about the work and their colleagues. Without that respect, that development, you just won't get the engagement you need for real, continuous improvement.
That makes a lot of sense. If you feel valued, if you're given the tools, you're much more likely to put in the effort to make things better. And continuous improvement, you said, is more than just small tweaks.
Right. Kaizen often gets translated as small incremental steps, and that's part of it. But Toyota's view includes those and the big game-changing strategic shifts, driven from the top. The source mentions the huge push into electric and autonomous vehicles. That's a massive strategic challenge, right? But it builds on their decades of solving smaller problems, refining technology piece by piece.
So it's evolution happening at different levels, strategic and day-to-day. And those 5 core principles you mentioned.
They're woven through everything. Challenge means having the courage, the creativity to tackle tough goals, often through a planning process called hoshinkanri. Respect and teamwork, we'll see those pop up all over the people side. And genshi genbutsu and the scientific approach in kaizen, they show up again and again in how they actually operate.
Okay, let's get into that. The operations. How do these big ideas actually play out on the factory floor or, in the daily work? What are some key concepts?
Let's start with flow and pull.
Flow, like things moving smoothly, and pull, reacting to what the customer wants.
Pretty much. Traditional manufacturing, it's often push. You make stuff based on a forecast, build up inventory at each stage, push it down the line. Toyota aims for flow material moving continuously, ideally one piece at a time without stopping. And where you can't get perfect flow, you use a pull system.
And pull is driven by the next step, ultimately by the customer.
Exactly. The idea is a downstream process only takes what it needs from the upstream process right when it needs it, and taking it acts as a signal for the upstream process to make just enough to replace what was taken, like a chain reaction. Taichi Ohno needed a way to manage this, especially between processes that ran at different speeds, like a fast stamping press feeding a slower assembly line. That's where Kanban came in.
Ah, the cards, the visual signals.
Yes. Kanban was Ohno's way to manage small controlled buffers within a pull system. When a process downstream uses up a container of parts, a Kanban signal, often a card, goes back upstream. It authorizes them to make just one more container's worth. That's it. The motto is, flow where you can, pull where you must.
Sounds like a smart way to control inventory between steps.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something surprising about Kanban earlier, that Toyota sees it as organized waste.
Yeah, this is one of those things that really flips conventional thinking on its head. Ohno believed any inventory was waste, period. So even the small, necessary buffers managed by Kanban, they're still seen as organized waste. They're not the end goal. They're a temporary measure on the way to true one-piece flow.
Wait, hang on. So you put Kanban in, but then your goal is to actually get rid of it or reduce it.
Exactly why. Because even controlled inventory, even Kanban, still hides problems. By deliberately reducing the number of Kanban cards or the amount in each container, you intentionally put stress on the system. If you had 4 bins of parts circulating and you take away 1 Kanban, suddenly the next process has 25% less buffer. If there's any delay or quality issue upstream, they'll run out of parts faster. That stress forces the team to find and fix the problems that were making that buffer necessary in the first place.
Wow. Okay. So the point isn't just to use Kanban. It's to use it as a lever to expose weaknesses and drive improvement.
Yeah.
So you eventually need less Kanban, less buffer.
Precisely. It's a dynamic tool for improvement, for learning. And this whole idea of smoothing things out, reducing waste through flow and pull, that leads right into heijunka.
Heijunka, leveling production. That seems complicated.
What is this?
What is it exactly?
It's about smoothing things out. Both the total volume of production and the mix of different products you're making over a period. So instead of making, say, a huge batch of blue cars, then a huge batch of red cars, they try to build a repeating sequence, like blue, red, silver, all day long.
Wouldn't that mean you're not building cars in the exact sequence customers ordered them? Isn't build to order the dream?
That's the common assumption, yeah. But the source argues that trying to rigidly build in the exact customer order sequence, it often creates chaos. You get unpredictable schedules, longer overall lead times, and surprisingly high inventory because you're constantly reacting to demand spikes for specific models.
How does leveling help with that?
By leveling the mix, like that blue, red, silver example, you actually gain flexibility. You can respond to overall customer demand much faster. You lower the risk of having piles of unsold cars of one type. You balance the workload for people and machines. And this is crucial. You smooth out the demand you place on your suppliers upstream, which lets them reduce their inventory and costs. It's kind of like going slow to go fast overall.
Okay, that makes sense. To make that kind of mixed production possible, though, you must need incredibly fast changeovers between models, right?
Oh, absolutely essential. Non-negotiable. Shigeo Shingo, who worked a lot with Toyota, he pioneered techniques called SMED, single-minute exchange of die. He achieved these drastic reductions, like over 97% reduction in setup times for huge stamping presses. The key was separating tasks you have to do when the machine is stopped, that's internal setup, from stuff you can prep while still running external setup.
Cutting changeovers from hours down to minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that unlocks leveling. Any visual examples of leveling in action?
The source mentions Toyota's housing plant. They actually intermingle components for different house designs on the same line to level the work. And a classic tool you might see is the heijunka box. It's basically a grid of slots, like mail slots, representing time periods. Kanban cards are put in the slots to visually schedule the mixed model sequence for a work area. It helps them build customer orders, but also maybe build a leveled amount for seasonal stock.
Keeping that level schedule must take constant discipline, though. I imagine there's pressure to just run big batches sometimes.
No, absolutely. The source mentions challenges, like applying it in service industries, say call centers, where demand is naturally lumpy, and just internal resistance sometimes from sales or manufacturing folks who are used to thinking in big batches, even if they can change over quickly.
Okay, so leveling helps smooth flow and pull.
Mm.
What about the work itself? How people do their jobs?
Mm.
The source talks about standardized work, but says it's not like old-school Taylorism.
Yes, huge difference here. Traditional scientific management, Taylorism. Engineers watch workers, figure out the one best way, write these super detailed procedures, and workers just have to follow them. No questions asked. That often creates friction, right? And workers can't easily contribute their own ideas for improvement.
And Toyota's way is different.
Fundamentally, at Toyota, the people doing the work are the ones who create and document the standardized procedures, and they're usually simple, practical.
The workers write the standards. That's a massive shift in ownership.
It really is. The source calls it an enabling bureaucracy. It gives you the structure you need for consistency, a baseline to work from. But it's designed by and for the people doing the job. Standards aren't set in stone. They're seen as a target, something the team is always refining, always improving. They become the foundation for continuous improvement, for innovation, and actually for growing the skills of the employees.
So it's not a static rule book. It's more like a living document created by the experts, the people doing it.
Exactly. It's the difference between seeing standards as just like a rigid cage to prevent mistakes versus seeing them as a launch pad for learning and getting better. It requires people to build habits through practice. The source uses Starbucks as an example, drawing from Karen Godet's book, Steady Work.
Yeah.
They brought in lean principles, used standardized work for things like making coffee, making drinks. They looked for waste right there on the Gemba, the actual store floor.
And did they find they couldn't just force one single corporate standard onto every single store?
Right. That was a key learning. They needed local adaptation. They used these seed stores where teams could experiment with the corporate guidelines, adapt them using problem solving based on their specific store layout, customer flow, whatever. It shows that balance between central direction and local know-how. The source also tells this powerful story about Starbucks using their standardization to stay calm and effective while serving the community after a local crisis hit.
That's a great example of how standardized work, when it's done right, builds resilience and responsiveness, not just rigidity.
Yeah, it really highlights that standards need human practice and intelligence. They're not just rules for robots.
Okay, so we've got flow, pull, leveling, standardized work. How does Toyota make sure quality isn't just checked at the end, but built right into the process?
That brings us to Principle 6. Build a culture of stopping to identify out-of-standard conditions and build in quality. Jidoka.
Stopping. Like stopping the whole assembly line. That sounds incredibly expensive.
Disruptive. It can seem that way, but the philosophy is Stopping now to fix a small problem is way less costly than letting a defect travel downstream. Imagine it infecting multiple later steps or even reaching the customer. The source quotes Fujio Cho saying, "Problems found by stopping the line. They must be fixed by tomorrow morning, otherwise they'll just happen again."
Wow, that puts intense pressure on fixing the root cause immediately. And this is tied to the andon system, the chords.
Yes. The andon system is typically a visual signal, maybe a light or an audible one. Often it's a cord a team member pulls right on the line. It immediately calls attention to a problem, an abnormality.
And pulling the cord automatically stops the line.
Okay, this is a common misunderstanding the source clarifies, especially when other companies like GM tried to copy the system just by looking at it. At GM, when they copied the andon cords and the team leader structure from the NUMI plant they ran with Toyota, the GM engineers were apparently surprised and kind of annoyed that the line didn't always stop dead instantly.
Why not? What was the difference?
Because the main point of the andon pull is to signal for immediate help from a team leader, a support person. It's about containing the problem right there and getting expert help to fix it fast at the source. Now, it can be set up to stop the line automatically if the issue isn't fixed within a short cycle time, but the first priority isn't always stopping everything. It's surfacing the problem and getting resources there now.
I see. So if you just copy the cord or light the form, but you don't have the underlying function, the culture of rapid response, the trained team leaders, the whole support system ready to jump in and fix things on the spot, then you just have a cord that doesn't really do much.
Exactly, you nailed it. The source tells this great little story from Ryder Automotive, a Toyota supplier. A manager wanted to install this fancy, expensive electronic andon system, but his Toyota mentor, his sensei, just took him to a hardware store, bought a red flag, a yellow flag, and a green flag, handed them over and said, "Here's your andon."
Just flags.
Just flags. The mentor's point was crystal clear. What matters is the system and the principle. Can everyone see instantly if there's a problem? Red flag. Is someone rushing over to help? Are you containing it and solving it? That's the core. The technology is secondary to the system and the response.
That anecdote really drives it home. It's the system, not just the tool. And this idea of building quality in, it applies outside manufacturing too.
Definitely. The source mentions Menlo Innovations, a software company. They use practices like pair programming. Two developers, one computer, constantly reviewing each other's code, catching bugs immediately. They stop the moment an issue comes up, fix it, prevent it from going further.
Pair programming as judoka for code. Makes sense. What about making everything visible so problems just jump out at you?
Right, visual control. Think about old factories, maybe outside Japan historically, often cluttered, chaotic, inventory piled up, hiding problems. Visual control aims for the opposite. Make the workplace so clear, so organized, that any deviation from the standard, any problem, is immediately obvious to anyone who walks by.
And 5S is a big part of that. Sort, straighten.
Yes, 5S is foundational. Sort, get rid of junk, straighten a place for everything in its place. Shine, keep it clean. And cleaning is often a form of inspection, right? You spot leaks, wear, abnormalities. Then standardize, create the rules to keep it that way, and sustain the discipline to make it stick. But again, like all these tools, 5S isn't magic on its own. It's powerful when it's part of the whole lean system.
So visual controls show the standard and highlight deviations instantly.
Exactly. It could be simple stuff, floor markings, shadow boards for tools so you see if one's missing, production status boards. The source also talks about the obeya, which means big room.
Obeya, big room.
Yeah, it's used a lot for visual project management, especially for complex things like developing a new car model. You get all the cross-functional teams together in one large room. The walls are covered with visual boards showing project status, key metrics, identified problems, schedules, everything. It makes Genchi and Butsu easier. You bring the facts, the data, the problems visually into one shared space for everyone to see and discuss.
Like putting the whole project's nervous system up on the walls. The source also mentioned a distribution center, Hebron. High variety, lots of picking. How did they use visuals?
Right. Even in that complex environment with sophisticated computer systems managing inventory and orders, they still used visual management alongside the tech to help manage daily work, show the expected flow, highlight bottlenecks or issues. It shows visual control isn't just for assembly lines. And critically, they involve the associates on the floor in identifying and implementing those visual improvements.
Okay, fascinating. We've covered a lot on the operational side, the continuous improvement pillar. Let's pivot now to that other pillar, the foundation really, respect for people.
Yeah.
How does Toyota actually develop its people, especially its leaders?
Yeah, this is arguably the hardest part for other companies to copy because it's so deeply cultural, requires such long-term commitment. Toyota overwhelmingly grows its leaders from within. These aren't just managers. They're expected to deeply understand the actual work, the gemba. They need to live the philosophy and, crucially, be good at teaching it to others.
That definitely contrasts with the model you see a lot elsewhere, bringing in external superstar CEOs
Mhm.
who might have great strategic ideas, but maybe don't know the nuts and bolts of the business.
It really does. Toyota leaders have to be connected to the gemba, which brings us back to Genchi Genbutsu, go and see. And it's more than just a quick factory tour. It's about deep factual analysis, going to the actual place where work happens, observing, understanding the real issues based on facts, not just assumptions or reports from afar.
Getting boots on the ground, seeing the reality. The source had that really vivid example, didn't it? The hospital IT system with all the false alerts.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic. They're in this meeting talking about spending millions to upgrade an IT system because it's spitting out constant false alarms. And this engineer, who gets Genchi Genbutsu, says, hang on, let's just pause the meeting and walk upstairs to the clinic where these alerts are actually happening.
And when they went to the Gemba, what did they find?
They just talk to the admin assistant who's getting the alerts. And she tells them, oh yeah, I just turned those off ages ago. They're always false.
Mm-hmm.
She knew they were false because she was supposed to get a voice call follow-up, which never came. Turns out, the alerts were being triggered by sensors on babies rolling over in their cribs. The root cause wasn't the multi-million-dollar IT system. It was a flawed process design and maybe a sensor issue.
Wow. Saved millions just by going to see and asking the person doing the work why. That's incredibly powerful.
And it shows Genchi Genbutsu isn't just for factories. The source mentions an accountant spending 6 months working in different plants just to understand operations before designing the accounting system. Imagine.
Deep immersion.
Mhm.
And how do leaders communicate and coach beyond just going to see?
There's this concept called Hurrensu. It's about communication flow. Report, inform, consult. Basically, timely reporting, keeping people in the loop, consulting effectively. Leaders use this, often informed by their Gemba observations, to coach their teams. Crucially, by asking targeted questions, guiding people to solve problems themselves rather than just giving orders. The source mentioned Yokoya-san, the chief engineer for the Sienna minivan. He drove the van thousands of miles himself across the US, Canada, Mexico. Why? To understand how real customers used it in real environments, he discovered things like needing to account for the higher crown on Canadian roads. That's Gemba insight.
You went to the customer's Gemba. So leaders grow from within. They know the work. They coach. How are people developed more broadly at all levels?
Well, the source shows this clear progression: team member, team leader, group leader, defined roles, clear responsibilities. But what's really striking is how many tasks that you might think of as white-collar things, like training new people, safety checks, quality assurance, even leading improvement projects get pushed down to the team level, to the team leaders.
So leaders aren't just managing from an office somewhere.
No way. Very hands-on expectation. Team leaders need to be ready to jump in, assist, even cover a job if needed. They're the first responders when that andon cord gets pulled. Group leaders are heavily involved in HR stuff, training, teaching, problem solving, really driving improvement efforts. There's that quote from Toyota UK, lose the first 2 hours, lose the shift. Talking about how section managers have to spend that critical time right at the start of the day on the floor, observing, coaching, supporting.
So like building that kind of leadership is a constant effort.
It is. The Toyota UK example showed they actually struggled after their initial Japanese mentors left. They had to consciously rebuild their leadership development system. Intensive training, getting managers back on the floor, using visual boards, daily huddles for coaching and tackling problems together.
And this brings us back to that GM comparison again, doesn't it? Trying to copy the structure.
Exactly. GM copied the title team leader from NUMMI, but they didn't build the surrounding system and culture, so the GM team leaders often just ended up filling in for absent workers or doing basic repairs. They weren't really empowered or expected to manage flow, drive improvement. The system didn't support it.
The structure needs the system and culture to actually function. But the source did give an example of a non-Toyota company that succeeded in building this internal capability, right? Herman Miller.
Yeah, the Herman Miller Furniture Company. That's a great case study. They embraced TPS principles. And critically, they made this public commitment not to lay people off because of productivity gains from lean. That built huge trust, let them keep manufacturing in the US. And they really focused on growing their own leaders internally. They had this structured program, HMPS Bridge. It involved intensive training, coaching, especially using Toyota business practices, TBP, for problem solving.
So they deliberately cultivated their own leadership pipeline.
Exactly. The source quotes someone involved saying it wasn't just about business results, it was about personal growth, developing people as leaders, as capable human beings. It really shows that investing in people, even through the struggle of learning these new ways, builds capability, builds loyalty, and is ultimately what sustains the whole thing.
Developing capable people who can see problems and solve them. That sounds like the absolute core of being a learning organization.
It really is. Toyota is fundamentally a learning organization built on individuals who are constantly learning, constantly practicing scientific thinking. The source points out, our natural tendency, it's towards fast thinking, jumping to conclusions, wanting certainty, which often doesn't work well in complex situations. Scientific thinking, that takes deliberate practice.
And how do they practice that? What does it look like?
They have frameworks like Toyota Business Practices, TBP. It's an 8-step problem-solving process. But Fujio Cho emphasized it's not meant to be a rigid checklist. It's a framework to develop a thinking process. You practice it on real problems, ideally with a coach. It forces you to clarify the gap ideal versus actual break it down, learn step by step.
A structured way to build that problem-solving muscle.
Yes. And Mike Rother built on this with his Toyota kata work. He saw the need for structured practice routines, almost like martial arts katas. One for continuous improvement itself, the improvement kata, or IK, and one for coaching others through it, the coaching kata, CK.
Like practicing scales on a piano, but for improvement. A routine to build the skill.
Exactly like that. The improvement kata basically has 4 steps. 1, understand your overall direction, the long-term challenge. 2, really grasp the current condition, go to the gemba, get the facts. 3, set your next immediate target condition, a step towards the challenge. 4, experiment to reach that target condition.
And experimentation is the key part.
Absolutely. The engine is iterative learning. Small, rapid experiments using the PDCA cycle plan, do, check, act. You predict what you think will happen, plan. You run the experiment, do. You check the actual results against your prediction, check. And then you adjust based on what you learned, act. Rinse and repeat. And ideally, you're doing this with a coach who uses the coaching kata, asking specific questions tied to those steps, guiding your thinking, not just giving you answers.
So managers shift from being directors to being coaches, developing their team's scientific thinking ability.
That's the goal. The source has this really detailed case study from Zingerman's mail order, the food company. They practiced IKCK, had university students as the learners, managers as the coaches.
Zingerman's using Toyota Kata. That's fascinating. What problem did they tackle?
They went after stockouts, what they called ohms, out of markets, by practicing the improvement kata, going to the gemba, mapping their process, watching how handlers picked orders. They found issues. Their Kanban wasn't really linked to actual customer consumption. Workers were traveling huge distances.
And their experiments led them where? What did they change?
Well, their experiments moved them away from the initial assumption of we just need more inventory. They started addressing root causes. They ended up developing a pull system based on actual consumption from a small, controlled supermarket area for inventory. They didn't just install a tool. They experimented their way towards a solution, and they significantly cut their OMMs over time.
That really shows the power of that shift, right? From assuming you know the answer to learning your way forward through experiments.
Absolutely. And the source notes this practice really helped Zingerman's respond calmly, adaptively during the whole COVID-19 upheaval. They could break down huge problems into manageable, bite-sized pieces. It also pointed out a potential challenge, though. While the middle managers and staff were really embracing this people-centric, adaptive, Gemba-focused mindset, the C-suite, the senior executives, sometimes seemed more focused on the big picture strategy, the numbers, maybe not fully connected to the depth of the cultural shift happening below.
That C-suite disconnect. That feels like a really critical point, a potential stumbling block for any company trying this. Okay, so we've gone from history through principles, operations, people development, learning. How does this all tie into Toyota's strategy and, how they sustain this over the long haul?
Well, Toyota's strategy isn't just about sudden revolutions. It's this blend of relentless, incremental innovation year after year, combined with periodic, major breakthroughs. Think Lexus, think Prius, think the Mirai fuel cell car.
The Prius was definitely a breakthrough. How does the Toyota way shape how that happened?
Oh, it was hugely influential. Developing the Prius was a massive gamble, a really bold strategy. It was led by Uchi Yamada, who, interestingly, wasn't even a hybrid expert himself, but he deeply trusted his cross-functional team. They famously used the obeya system, that big room visual management, to handle the intense pressure and accelerate the timeline. And strategically, despite pressure, they decided to develop the core hybrid technologies, the motor, the control systems, completely in-house. That was fundamental to their dominance later.
So the culture, the systems, they enabled taking that strategic risk and actually delivering. How does Toyota handle big disruptions now, like the rise of pure EV companies, Tesla, for instance?
The source contrasts Toyota's approach with some traits you see in disruptors like Tesla. Tesla is described as highly focused, often very leader-centric, prioritizing getting a beloved product to market fast, maybe viewing people as more interchangeable parts. Toyota's way is presented as more balanced. They integrate new tech autonomous driving, IoT, electrification, but they do it strategically. They invest broadly. And they rely heavily on that deep culture, those capable, motivated people.
And the source suggests that balanced approach might actually be more sustainable for most established companies facing disruption.
Yes, that's the argument. While that focused disruptor model clearly works for startups, for the larger established companies, Toyota's model, building internal capabilities, strong culture, integrating new tech thoughtfully while leaning on your people, is likely a more resilient path through disruption.
So it's not just about having the plan, it's about having the organization, the capability, the culture to actually execute it and adapt it.
Precisely. Strategy execution at Toyota isn't just following a plan, it's seen as a process of learning, iterative learning. Guided by the overall direction, yes, but tested through those bite-sized experiments, like Rother's CATA model suggests. You're constantly testing your assumptions against reality. Alvin Toffler had that great quote about thinking about big things while you are doing small things. The Gemba, the actual work, becomes the ultimate taskmaster, showing you if your strategy is actually working.
And sustaining all this, this energy, this learning, it sounds exhausting. Wouldn't it be easy just to slip back into old, comfortable habits?
It absolutely is easy to slip back. Organizational entropy is real. Things tend to decay. The source argues sustainability isn't about just mechanically holding the gains. It's about actively countering that decay. Lean processes, paradoxically, by revealing problems, by creating constructive stress, actually pull the organization out of its comfort zone. They demand continuous energy, continuous effort, just to keep improving.
So putting lean in place actually requires more effort initially, not less, because you're constantly finding things to fix.
Exactly. And that's a key reason why purchase lean often fails. When the driving force is just external consultants, it rarely sticks. The source contrasts the failure like at a company called General Equipment where consultants got great results that vanished quickly, with the success at Herman Miller or the way a true Toyota sensei works.
How is that approach different?
It's slower, often starts smaller, maybe in a model area. Crucially, it puts the company's own managers in charge right from the start. The sensei coaches, challenges them, lets them struggle and learn by doing. Success comes from building internal capability, building that learning culture through coached struggle, not just installing tools delivered by outsiders.
Which brings us right back around again. People development, learning, culture. That's the engine. Internal leaders, coaching, systems thinking, persistence, humility, building capability.
That really is the long game for the Toyota way.
Okay, so let's try to wrap up this deep dive. Thinking about everything we've discussed from the source, what's the absolute core takeaway? What makes the Toyota way so effective but so hard for others to truly copy?
I think fundamentally it's that it's so much more than just a toolkit. It's not just 5S or Kanban or and-on cords. It's a complex, deeply integrated system and a culture built on those core principles. Respect for people, continuous improvement, scientific thinking, Genchi Genbutsu. And it connects everything from the smallest task on the line right up to the biggest strategic choices.
It's the whole interconnected why and how behind the operational results we see.
Exactly. And the source even hints that the real secret, if there is one, might just be in the human connections, creating these strong bonds between individuals, between partners, people who fit together just right, working together towards a common goal, which is, a stark contrast to organizations where people feel disconnected, where there's low trust, lack of clear direction.
And these ideas, they're not just for car manufacturing, are they?
Oh, absolutely not. The underlying principles, they're incredibly broad. Scientific thinking, problem solving through experiments, really understanding the actual work your gemba, whatever that is for you, respecting people, developing them, challenging the status quo. You can apply that thinking almost anywhere, any field, any kind of organization.
So, thinking about all that,
Yeah.
what does this deep dive mean for you listening right now?
Well, the source material ends with this really direct challenge. It says, please read, but then please do. The reading is interesting, but the real value comes from trying to apply these ideas.
Right. How could you maybe take just one small step towards applying some of this in your own work, maybe even your life today? Perhaps it's just clearly defining a challenge you're facing, or really trying to understand the current condition by going to your Gemba. Maybe setting one small, achievable target condition, and then running one tiny experiment, making a prediction first, just to see what you learn.
Yeah, and it might feel awkward. It might feel counterintuitive at first that process of learning through struggle, it's kind of baked into the approach. But that struggle, if you approach it with a learning mindset, with respect for the people involved, that's actually how you build real capability. It's how you solve tough problems, and it's how you forge stronger connections.
How can you embrace that struggle? Just a little bit for learning and connection today.
Definitely something to ponder.